today we have a deck profile here of a Yubel Albaz, well, Yubel branded, I guess, Azamina deck. It's something I've been working on for a while. I am missing one card, but that's just the only thing really. So we'll start out with a couple of things here because it makes it easy to do it in little packets, I guess. We'll start out with the Yubel one. So we have a regular Yubel, a Spirit of Yubel, and then 3 Nightmare Thrones. And we have 1 extra terraforming in here. This is just very simple. You basically, if you get one of these in your hand, you can easily use a branded fusion to send the other one to the graveyard to go into a Phantom of Yubel, or you can just, terraforming is like an extra field spell really. You just play this card, destroy the Spirit of Yubel in your deck, and go to a Yubel, which you can then use to shuffle these back into the deck and go with a Phantom of Yubel, or since this deck does run Super Polymerization, you can also just Super Poly the field. Really depends on, you know, going first, going second, what gets negated, what doesn't get negated. It's always hard to really explain how a combo is supposed to work because you have to keep in mind how many cards are in the game that it can technically kind of stop it, and sometimes they get stopped in certain places that isn't as big of a deal, so it's a bit hard to explain entire combos like that. Next up we have 3 Albaz, or Fallen of Albaz. We have 1 Albion. I don't really like playing this one on too many. It's not as necessary. We have 3 Albaz, which is pretty much your normal summon in this deck. You have 3 of these and a branded opening that can search these if you really need it. We have 2 Tri-Brigade Mercurius, a Tragedy, and a Blazing Cartesia for the Albaz or branded monsters. I personally am not a huge fan of the Guiding Quem. I don't know what it is. I've played it several times. There's some nice combos I can do with it. I'm just not a huge fan of it. I guess it's just not really my thing, so I kind of took it out because I kind of needed some space in this deck. I don't like playing too many cards. I don't like being that person running like 50 something cards, but hey, you know, I got some extra search cards in case my opponent does something. So that's an easy little setup here. Albion will obviously be your normal summon to search for a branded fusion if you need to. Albion can always send a card from your deck to the graveyard that has Fallen of Albaz in the name, or, you know, mentions it. And then, well, technically it's a branded spell or trap card, but they tend to mention the Fallen of Albaz. And then you can basically just put this at the bottom of the deck to get a draw. It's okay-ish. Most of the time I only really send 1 card to the graveyard, or occasionally I'm just tinning on my deck with this thing and getting an extra draw. Albaz is kind of self-explanatory. If you really have to, you can normal summon this thing and fuse with something on the field. Again, there are super polys in this deck, so even if the effect of Albaz would get negated, you can still chain a super poly on it to kind of like take something off of the field that's a bit in the way. Blazing Cartesia is, I think a lot of branded is a bit self-explanatory for people who play branded, but for those who don't, this one can fuse from the field. It can go get a Kragonal or Krangonal, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, the fusion. You can fusion it with this card, as well as it comes back to your hand every time a fusion gets sent to the graveyard. Probably the main reason why I play this card is just it gives me extra cards in the hand that I kind of need for some other cards to either send to the graveyard or tribute. It's just kind of really the best thing it does. I'm not, you know. And then we have 2 Mercurius and a Tragedy. I play 3 Allure of Darknesses, so these things can kind of search for things as is. This one can, whenever sent to the graveyard or banished, it searches for an Alibi, Jester of Despia, which you can then summon to get a branded fusion. Same thing as when it's banished. And these ones as well, if it does get banished, or if you, because I play Cold Sarcophagus as well, you can banish it to search for a card that mentions the Fallen of Albaz, or the Fallen of Albaz itself. I do believe it has to be a monster and not anything else, but most of the time, you know, you use it to get either an Albaz or an Albion, or in some cases, but in this case I had to take it out. You can play a Spriggan's Kit to basically search for a branded fusion, but I kind of was running out of space, so I kind of took that one out. And then we have the spell or trap cards for Albaz, which is obviously branded fusion. It's on 1, it's a bit of a pain, but it is what it is. We have a branded in red, which you can easily use to extra fusion, or just go to, what I mostly do is just go to a Chimera Guardian Chimera. This thing, Guardian Chimera. And it gives you, depending on how many monsters you fuse from hand or field, it gives you a certain amount of draws, and it allows you to destroy some cards on the field. And then we have 3 branded opening, which will help you search for an Alibi, which you can then just special summon to the field, and then search for the branded fusion. Then branded retribution is pretty much a fusion duplication in a certain sense. With something like Albion or anything else, if you were to try it, I often draw it for some reason. You send it to the graveyard, you banish it from the graveyard, and you add the branded fusion from your graveyard back to your hand. Next up we have the super polymerizations. This one is obviously for Yubel. You can use it to go into a Yubel the Loving Defender Forever, which literally just takes everything off of the field. But you also have the staple cards. Well, staple, I'm not running a Mud Dragon. That's one you could use. You could also go into a Garuva or a Predator Plant, Trigger Stipelia, to kind of like get rid of some cards on the field. Depending on how you want to play, you can add some cards into your side deck to alter your extra deck depending on what you're playing against. Sometimes it can be worth doing that. Next up we have technically the Azamina line, which is kind of funny because there's no real Azamina cards in the deck. We have 3 times the Abelstar, the Black Witch, which can search for a Deception of the Sinful Spoils, which I currently do not have in my deck, but it has to be in the deck. I have a placeholder currently because I just haven't gotten the card yet. That's really it. We then have 3 Wanted Seeker of the Sinful Spoils to search these back. Then we have a Hollowed Azamina, which allows you to fusion summon by sending a Sinful Spoils from your field or hand to the graveyard. And then we have this thing that doesn't really matter what it is, because this is supposed to be Deception of the Sinful Spoils. Deception of the Sinful Spoils, I will pop it up on the screen, is a continuous spell card that allows you to tribute a monster to search for an Azamina card, which will obviously be this card. You can then play this one and then send the Deception of the Sinful Spoils to the graveyard to just fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck that is an Azamina one, which in this case we play 2 of them. We play this one that I cannot pronounce, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce that one. It's Mu Viscialo Lago something, Vilago. I'm just gonna ignore that the C is there and just call it Vilago. And we have Ilia Sylvia. So the way that this one would work is that you would either use the Wanted Seeker of Sinful Spoils or just special summon the Black Witch on their own, search for the Deception of the Sinful Spoils, which then allows you to tribute any monster. You can just tribute the Abelstar to search for the Azamina, the Hollowed Azamina. You then play the Hollowed Azamina, get rid of the Deception of the Sinful Spoils, special summon the Vilago, and then when Vilago is special summoned, you can search your deck for a Sinful Spoil card, which would be a Wanted of the Secret Spoils, Sinful Spoils, not Secret Spoils. Then you can, with the Hollowed Azamina, once per turn when it's in the graveyard, you can shuffle an Azamina card back into your extra deck, add this card back to your hand, and then you play it and you chain your Wanted Seeker of the Sinful Spoils to it. Search your deck for an extra Diabellstar. This is just an extra card you'll get in your hand, and then the Hollowed Azamina will basically tribute or send this card to the graveyard, and then you'll special summon the Sylvia, which is basically just an Omni Negate. It's whenever your opponent activates a card, tribute this card, negate it. And then if you want to go a little bit further, you can banish the Sinful Spoils one to send the Deception of the Sinful Spoils back to the bottom of your deck, and then you draw a card, just get an extra draw out. Then next turn, that Sylvia is most likely going to be in your graveyard, you shuffle it back into the extra deck and you add this card back to your hand. That's pretty much how this part of the deck would play. Then we have a couple of extra cards. I have a Bastille Magnamut and a Baldrake. Baldrake is one I often swap out for some other ones as well. I've tried out Drewsworm. Drewsworm I feel like is a lot better with some links, but this deck tends to kind of lock you to fusion due to Branded Fusion. The Summoning is kind of okay too, but I often feel like I just don't have a branded card that I really feel like just tossing to the graveyard. So it's a bit of a pick and choose thing here. I personally don't play Lubalian, because without having a branded continuous spell that I really want to play on my field, I just don't find a good point for it. That's all there really is to that. And then the last few cards, we have Trialo of Darkness, a Gold Sarcophagus for the Despian Tragedy or the Tribrigade Mercurian, and a Foolish Burial for the same reason. Despian Tragedy, send it to the graveyard, search the deck for an Alabang, summon the Alabang, and then your branded stuff goes off. The extra deck, I feel like I've shown most of this because we have the Phantom of Yubel and the Loving Defender, which is obviously the Yubel parts. Then we have 2 Albions, 1 Lubalian, 2 Mirror Jades, and here comes a card that you can alter however you want. I personally like playing Titaniclad. Not entirely sure why, I just think it's a cool card. We have this one that I also don't know how to pronounce, Krangonel, the Dusk Dragon. We have a Despian Quaritas, which you can, funny enough, either super poly with an Alabang, or you can basically just, whenever your opponent would special summon a monster, you can just send this to the graveyard and special summon this one from your extra deck. Then we have our 2 Azamina cards. You go with, this one isn't entirely necessary, I would say. It does give you an extra card, but in the end of the day, since again this deck doesn't run link summons, this one isn't really necessary. When you actually do play like a bit more of an Azamina combo, you can kind of like just link off with this thing into anything, and then you can just get it out of the graveyard back into your extra deck with the Hollowed Azamina, and then just go for this one at the end of the turn basically. But I just like having like that extra 1 card, it's always nice to have. And then we have a Featherplant Dragostapelia, a Garura, and a Guardian Chimera. These are kind of like the super poly targets. This is like the branded in red one. I always use it like that. It's just a really nice thing to just kind of, I wouldn't say interrupt, but just those extra draws is something that I really do like to get. That is it for the deck list. This is kind of running a lot less Yubel cards in it than I normally do. It also kind of reminds me of my original days of playing Yubel, where since Yubel didn't have as much support as it did, I kind of did just run a Yubel and a Limit Reverse in my deck, and I just tried to get this to the graveyard to get it back to the field with a Limit Reverse to then go to the Towering Cannon. It was a lot of fun to do, but at the end of the day it didn't have an actual meaning to be on the field other than stalling my opponent down, and hopefully I can summon something to slowly whittle away at my opponent's life points. So I feel like at least in this version, even though it's a lot less Yubel cards than normal, it has an active role, as well as the fact that I actually do play branded. It's kind of like my secondary deck in a way, if you ignore heroes. And I kind of wanted to just put them together because I've noticed that since I've gotten my Yubel support, I kind of don't play my Albaz that much anymore, and it's a little bit sad. So I kind of wanted to at least give my deck still a way to play.